Jocelyn Smitowski. I'm the director of the Center for Christian Jewish Learning here at Boston College, and it's my real delight to welcome you here. And it's my distinct honor to welcome the Reverend Dr. Willie James Jennings to deliver the 12th annual John Paul II Lecture in Christian Jewish Relations. Pope John Paul II was a towering figure in the work of reconciliation between Christians and Jews, and it is part of the mission of our center to honor and continue. So please allow me to introduce our speaker. The Reverend Dr. Willie James Jennings is the Andrew W. Mellon Professor of Theology and Africana Studies at Yale University Divinity School. Dr. Jennings received his BA in Religion and Theological Studies from Calvin College, his M.Div from Fuller Theological Seminary, and his Ph.D. from Duke University. Dr. Jennings teaches in the areas of Christian thought, race theory, decolonial, and environmental studies. He is the author of The Christian Imagination, Theology and the Origins of Race. His commentary on the book of Acts won the Reference Book of the Year award from the Academy of Parish Clergy. And he's also the author of After Whiteness, An Education and Belonging, which won the 2020 Book of the Year award from Publishers Weekly. And those last two books are on sale at the rear of the room that you are free to purchase later. When I assumed the role of the director of the center in 2022, I knew that I wanted Dr. Jennings to deliver this lecture, and it only took 3 years for that to happen. I believe Dr. Jennings is one of our finest contemporary theologians. His writings are suffused with a concern for the work of repair between Jews and Christians that is a sign of God's dream of reconciliation between all people. After we hear from Dr. Jennings, there will be time for questions from the audience and also a dessert reception. So now please join me in welcoming Dr. Jennings to speak on To Touch the World Together, Why Jews and Christians Need a New Doctrine of Creation.
Good evening, everyone. It is a high honor and a great joy for me to be here with you this evening. I want to thank Dan and Ruth for this fabulous invitation and for hosting me. What a joy for me to be here. As I look out on the audience, I see so many people who I know and love. It's good to see your faces, but I do want to acknowledge one person who's very special to me, Dr. M. Sean Copeland, who was here this evening. And so I wanted to acknowledge her. And please wave, Dr. Copeland, so that people can see you. It is always a joy to be in the presence of one of the great Catholic theologians of our time. I want to bring you warmest greetings from Dean Gregory Sterling, the faculty, the staff, and the students of Yale Divinity School, where I have the joy of serving. They would want me to offer you their best wishes, especially at this time. And I am mindful as I give this very esteemed lecture named after one of the great popes of our time, that the current pope, our Holy Father, it remains unwell. And so I continue to have him in my prayers and dedicate my thoughts this evening to the Holy Father. This is indeed a very painful time in this country, and the cold weather matches the political climate and the coldness that carries so much of the reality of the political at this time. And so I am also mindful of that as I offer this lecture. It has always been about the land. You could write the history of the world as the struggle over land. You could capture many of our most urgent problems by starting with the question, who controls the land? Our thinking about land guides how we understand borders and boundaries, both spatial and cultural, our built environments, and even our own bodies. And in this moment, my friends, our thinking about land, let's call it our geographic imagination, if you will, is in need of redemption. From the multiple wars being fought over land, to our pandemic of homelessness, to our unrelenting struggles against the oligarchic forces of real estate and development, our geographic imaginations are in need of transformation. This evening, I want to propose a place where we might begin to envision the transformation of our geographic imaginations. It is precisely where Christians and Jews share a common starting point. We believe that the God of Israel is our creator. Indeed, that belief is profoundly, relentlessly ecumenical, because it encompasses all that is and every people, all created by this loving God. Yet there is another work that this shared belief can do that remains untapped and urgently needed at this moment of our exhausted geographical imaginations. This shared belief opens toward another way of relating to the living world and to one another. There is another way. There is another way, and it was presented, I believe, at the emergence of Christianity, but not perceived. And then when glimpses of it flashed into brief recognition, it was resisted and refused, pressed, if you will, to the very edge of existence. This other way of relating to the living world and to one another was poised to form at the place of an unprecedented interface between Jews and Christians. Let's begin by calling it a thicker, denser form of creaturely perception. A thicker, denser form of creaturely perception, perceiving ourselves as creatures together, and where a different kind of thinking about being part of God's creation, a different kind, if you will, of doctrine of creation could form from being positioned with other peoples joined together in seeing ourselves as creatures of the living God. What is at stake here is much more than a shared acknowledgement that we have all been created by God and therefore are profoundly related. It is much more than saying that we are all created out of the same cosmic material, that we share the same quantic and subatomic architecture. What is at stake? What is at stake is a way of seeing that is at the same time a way of relating. We in the Western world are already captured inside a distorted way of seeing that is at the same time a diseased way of relating that is killing us and destroying our world at the exact same time. It is a way of seeing and relating that I am calling these days possessive naturalism. Possessive naturalism. Possessive naturalism grew out of the way Christian colonial settlers formed their worlds in the New Worlds. At the heart of that formation, as I have argued, they pressed native peoples to change their vision of possession. Change their vision of possession. To transition from a vision of possession rooted in entanglement and symbiosis, let's call that possession by, toward a vision of possession bound up in ownership. Let's call that possession of. For so many indigenous peoples, their worlds claimed them. Plants, animals, earth, ocean, river, mountain, sky called their name, made intelligible their existence, and articulated with them the stories that organized, made real their lives. This was possession by. For the colonial settlers, this was nonsense. The only real possession they believed and they taught was possession of. There, between the quick emergence of commodification and the long, slow emergence of objectification, colonial settlers formed what I call the delusion condition, building from the thought, the magisterial thought of the great African-American mystic and theologian Howard Thurman. The delusion condition, my friends, in this regard, is the belief that everything should be and eventually will be owned. The delusional condition is the acceptance of propertied relations. The acceptance of propertied relations as fundamental to life, down to the bone and to the dirt. That condition causes us to imagine land and body inside commodity form, and it drives forward one crucial element of possessive naturalism, the element of indwelling, the ability to indwell. Indwelling is an ancient idea that has always helped to explain and articulate presence, both human and divine. Indwelling. Colonial missionaries, for example, understood themselves to be offering to native peoples an alternative reality of indwelling. That is, the Holy Spirit, they said, is the only one who may indwell. Or to say it more ominously, the Holy Spirit is the only one who has the right to indwell. In this regard, it is the ability, the power to indwell that establishes spiritual freedom. There is, however, a vision of freedom forming within possessive naturalism, forming within the colonial moment, beyond spiritual freedom, one that requires possession and self-possession for material freedom. It requires, let's put it this way, it requires the indwelling of ownership. The indwelling of ownership. And that forms implicitly through the, should I say explicitly, through the juridical and bureaucratic developments in the New Worlds around everything from the owning of slaves and other chattel, all the way to land ownership and ownership of one's labor, all the way down to one's body. The idea of indwelling shapes the way people claim property as extensions of the self. Property as extensions of the self. The spirit of ownership claiming the body, that is self-possession. The spirit of ownership extending the body into the dirt, that is private property. Pressing the body across the land. And in this way, this spirit becomes a replacement for the Holy Spirit's indwelling. That is, the spirit of the owner is now in the land. And like the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, it both binds and liberates. This spirit of ownership that as it grows through the colonial period allows all of us to envision our bodies extended into the land and enabling us to sense and embrace the creation as that which may be owned. This spirit of ownership enables a kind of relentless contemplation of the land as owned. The body and the land formed through own existence. The body and land mapped across real bodies and real places. This body and land interpenetrate one another through a logic of possession. This pneumatology of ownership forms the horizon upon which to understand the development of ideas like sovereignty, autonomy, recognition, territoriality, and, of course, nationalism. Nationalism of blood and soil, of a people bound to a land through possession and the spirit of ownership. That spirit of ownership gave life to a distorted love of land. This distorted love of land weaves belonging with the ideas of private property and collective territory, of border and boundary. Think of this as a strained, even tragic, that's the word we need right now, even tragic sense of belonging. We meet this, let's call it a pneumatology, from the idea of the study of the spirit, this pneumatology of ownership. We meet with this pneumatology of ownership, a dismal connection of body and land made possible through the relentless struggle to claim and sustain possession. Possession in this regard is life, and dispossession is death. Possession is life. Dispossession is death. If our way of seeing and relating to the living world and to each other has been formed inside possessive naturalism, then is another way possible. By calling this possessive naturalism, I am acknowledging that to think a different way of seeing and relating would mean thinking against what seems obvious, necessary, irreversible, and let's add the last word, natural. It would involve, at the very least, if you've been listening closely, it would involve at the very least, starting with what many indigenous peoples knew and know, that being possessed by, being claimed by a place is a way of knowing and living that resists a life enclosed by the line of property or border. Now, let me be clear. I am under no illusion that such thinking would be easy or even desirable for a world configured through property relations. But what if such a world was not only possible, but promised at the emergence of a faith born at an unprecedented interface of Jew and Gentile? There, even before the difference between a Jew and a Christian formed, even before Christians would call themselves a people called Christian, there at that place, a possibility appeared and then began to fade before it could be fully grasped. This was a place that was not a single place, but a possibility, my friends, a possibility presented with the emergence of a faith formed wrestling with a question that would alter the way Gentiles would perceive their world, a question that would alter the way Gentiles would perceive their world. What do you do? What do you do when you find out that the God that created you and indeed loves you is in fact not the gods, not your gods, but the God of another people? Inside this question is another question, even more poignant and pressing. What does it mean? What does it mean to enter the way another people see the creation? One more time for students by taking their notes. What does it mean to enter the way another people see the creation? If you get nothing else tonight, hold on to that question. What appears at the emergence of this faith we will come to call Christian is an invitation to a different subjectivity, emerging in the tense generative space between Jew and Gentile. A different subjectivity means a different way of being in the world and with God. A strange terrain. A strange terrain appears in the place created by the life of Rabbi Jesus, where creaturely perception will enter a new journey. There is a scene in Christian scripture that gives us a glimpse, just a glimpse, of this strange terrain that will call us to a different subjectivity inside a different seeing and relating. It is found in the book of Acts, the 10th and the 11th chapters. There, woven together through several meetings, was an invitation so breathtakingly radical that we have yet to see it, hear it, and certainly catch up with it, with its necessity for understanding together who we are as God's creation. In that story, as some of you might know, in that story of Acts 10 and 11, there is a centurion named Cornelius. And there was a Jewish disciple of Jesus whose name is well known to many of us. It is Peter. Each of them marked by meeting God, each of them marked by a profound difference in positionality. Cornelius is a central agent of the Roman social order who is also a God-fearer, one familiar with the God of Israel, yet he is Gentile, uncircumcised, not one of Israel. Cornelius in the story, he waits for the arrival of Peter, who he has called at the command of a messenger angel sent from God. Cornelius sends his slaves and his soldiers to bring Peter to him. Yet as they journey toward Peter, Peter also waits. He waits in prayer and hunger as someone prepares food for him. He waits in prayer and hunger. And as he waits, God enters the scene amid Peter's praying, amidst Peter's hungering. This is crucial for our purposes because understanding what will follow depends on remembering this praying and hungering creature. God lowers a sheet, that sheet filled with food for the future. Food for the future. Peter, this Jewish follower of Jesus, now learns of the desire of God. Through vision, God invites Peter into a reordered reality of predation. Let me say that again. A reordered reality of predation. Toward eating on the frontier of difference. Toward eating on the frontier of difference. Peter knew. Peter knew what ancient peoples knew. And what God articulated through the grammar of animality, by which I mean a way of signifying that understands that animals implicate specific lands and their flora and fauna and specific peoples. The land, the animals, the plants, and the peoples are all woven together. The land, the animals, the plants, the peoples are all woven together. To name one is to imply the others, and to imply different rituals and practices of predation, of hunting, killing, gathering, preparing, cooking, eating different animals, all of which invite different figurations of life because it implies different eating with other peoples. In Peter's world, animals are with people. And in this moment in the story, the animals do not disappear into the theological background any more than Peter's real hunger disappears. They are all there. Animals, hunger, praying, Peter and his people, Cornelius and his people together. Saying they are together does not deny that this is a vision and not an actual sheet with animals, nor am I denying the distinctions and differences between humans and other animals. It means that reconfigurations within a web of life, are implied by the vision with its lowering of the sheet. More to the point, the lowering of the sheet implies an unprecedented invitation to join Jew and Gentile through water and spirit and eating. Peter and Cornelius meet in the aftermath of the sheet and together experience the divine presence guiding and directing them. And with it, here is my point. They enter the struggle to understand what God is doing in the world through them and with them. From the emergence of this tense generative space between Jew and Gentile would come the slow awareness of a shared claiming by a loving Creator God, with the realization that together they must now enter a shared project. They must enter a shared project of living that would be an ongoing reconfiguration of perception and experience. This scene presents the possibility of a new trajectory of thought and life through which the stories that Gentiles have told themselves of their gods now come into review. Gentiles have become second readers now. Second readers. Created by Israel's God, they now read after Israel, from inside Israel's story and with them, following their own reading of the world. Being a second reader offers a perceptual possibility for Gentiles of entering a new way of understanding life as the creation of Israel's God. All of this is a surprise. And surprise is a serious and dangerous divine gift. Disrupting, dismantling, maybe even destroying the connection between Gentiles, multiple as we are, and our many gods. Not every god, as we know, was tyrannical, but all gods are now seen in the light cast by the God of Israel, revealed to us through God's holy servant, Jesus, and the presence of the Spirit. Biblical Israel, for its part, was also brought by God to a second reading inside their reading, to follow the Spirit into the wideness of their God and the fullness of this God's creation. Second reading for biblical Israel constituted a different kind of new than for Gentiles. It was the new of the expansion of sight, not the abandonment of it. Before we mark this as a possible intellectual precursor to proselytism or evangelism, it is first a new interface. Jew and Gentile enabled by the Spirit to enter a reality of shared creaturely perception. Again, shared creaturely perception. Jewish followers of Jesus grasping the ways of their God in and on Gentile flesh, in and through Gentile ways of life, and the task of conceiving and enacting a shared faithful life to the God of Israel. Gentiles grasping the ways of Israel's God, who they now know is their God, in and on Jewish flesh, in and through Jewish ways of life, and the task of making sense of their Gentile practices in and with the land. Of course, none of this would be seamless or easy or easily accepted. Remember, this is strange terrain, rough ground. No roadmap here. Only steps in and toward a reconfiguration. Will we watch the sunrise over the mountains together? Will we share fish and loaves as the sun sets, and we hear birds in the evening song talking over the cicadas? My poetic musings imagine questions asked at this moment by Peter and his people and Cornelius and his people. Now, much could be said about this moment I just recounted from the book of Acts, but I want to trace out the invitation that is implied by the scene, or maybe simply imagined by me, whereby Jew and Gentile are invited into a shared sensing and articulating of the divine claim and our creaturely connection to one another. Together, Jew and Gentile would consider fleshly what I call their protocols of earth touch. Protocols of earth touch. The protocols of earth touch mean the ways we touch land and plant, water, sky, and animal, and what forms of intentionality and reciprocity, with what care or fear, hope or desire, and how we have been guided in that touch by our ancestors. The protocols of earth touch for Jews and Gentiles have been, in this scene, interrupted by the touch of our Creator through the Spirit at the site of Israel's life and the life of Rabbi Jesus. Together they have come to the door of a complex new task of relating to the living world together. They are being called to what the anthropologist David Abrams calls a perceptual reciprocity. For students, let me say that again, a perceptual reciprocity. That perceptual reciprocity would mean, in this sense, a perceiving through and with multiple interlocutors, human and non-human. The lowering of the sheet is the entering of the depths of creation, out of which something new could emerge. Jew and Gentile together are being drawn into a deeper life together and turned out together toward being drawn into the lives of other people by the Spirit, other peoples. They are being turned out together toward the lands and peoples of the world, to enter those worlds, to read after, becoming one with them, and ultimately allowing those worlds to speak through them for the sake of the glory of God. Jews and Gentiles were poised to step forward together in learning of the intricacies of divine intimacy with the creation. This learning of the intricacies of divine intimacy with the creation would constitute a path of contemplation on the frontiers of difference. A path of contemplation on the frontiers of difference. Here we have arrived at the work of grasping the unfolding of creation and of giving witness to a new knowing inside a beautifully strange practice of contemplation that constantly discerns connection. This would be a practice of contemplation rooted in the multitude, human and non-human, and aimed toward a shared project of embodying the divine claim upon us as creatures through the Spirit, all the way to the bone and the dirt. Now, the trained ear among you will hear in my comments my engagement with those theologians who are thinking quite a bit about contemplation these days, like Sarah Coakley, Douglas E. Christie, Martin Lair, and your own Brian Robinette, and a host of other folks who refuse that old bifurcation of systematic and aesthetical theology and resist the tragic alienation of theological conceptualization from the spiritual disciplines. Yes. Yet I aim to go where these authors have not gone. I aim to think contemplation as a new orientation. It is an orientation of contemplation toward a practice of assimilation. To assimilate in this regard means first to follow in the way of another, to speak and eat after another, to construct a shared form of existing. In this sense, I want to hold assimilation close to the logic of confession, to speak the same and to eat the same. Indeed, I want to suggest this form of assimilation as inherent to confession. It would be a practice of assimilation without destruction. A practice of assimilation, a practice of being assimilated without being destroyed. But why assimilation, Dr. Jennings? That's a great question to ask me. Thank you so much. Why assimilation? The idea of assimilation, both in its ancient instantiations as well as on this side of colonial modernity, carries the tragic connotations of absorption, loss, death, and is therefore for many people, fundamentally irredeemable as a positive idea. It's just irredeemable. We meet this idea most powerfully through the history of Christianity's crucial role in establishing practices of assimilation in the modern world. I need not rehearse the dismal history of virulent assimilation, antecedently present in the anti-Semitic practices of Christianity and born anew through colonial modernity and Christianity that continues to this very moment in some instances. The crucial matter, the critical matter for us in that ongoing history of assimilation is what it did and does to the reality of creaturely becoming. What it did and does to the reality of creaturely becoming. The practices of assimilation facilitated by colonial Christianity captured both body and land and aimed both at an imagined maturity rooted in the white European and his ways of life. The European colonial settler sees the trajectories of becoming of peoples, and turn those trajectories back toward European life. As I like to say, people grow, people mature. And colonial settlers believe this. But they also believe that it was their responsibility, their right to define what growth and maturity looked like for everyone. And in so believing, they subverted the reality of creaturely becoming. Now, let me be clear. Christianity did not invent assimilation. I'm not saying that. Assimilation practices reach into the ways ancient conquerors stole lands and enslaved peoples, yet with colonial practices of assimilation, we meet Europeans who imagine that they were articulating and enacting universals: freedom, rationality, autonomy, sovereignty, all aimed at flourishing life both in the colonies and the metropoles. In this regard, I'm less focused on the historical results of that becoming, that is, the finished man, the human that might be achieved at the end of a civilizing process, and more concerned with the fabrications of a new becoming, executed among peoples throughout the colonies and the metropoles. What if, though? What if there were a different way? What if there was a different way to frame a practice of assimilation, away from its colonial matrix and an asymmetrical horizon, one people assimilating another? I am imagining it beyond violence, beyond conquest, beyond loss or erasure. That is, I'm imagining it beyond producing social death and death-bound subjects. I'm also imagining it beyond forms of forced imitation rooted in the colonialist desire to possess, control, and master the minds, bodies, and behaviors, along with the land and labor of their former colonized subjects. What if assimilation might be reconceived from the sight of people relating to the land? Let me say that again. What if assimilation might be reconceived from the sight of people relating to the land, to animals, to plants, to bodies of water, to seasons, as they relate to one another? What if assimilation might be thought of as a shared life oriented in and toward justice? A shared life oriented in and toward justice. This would be a life that slowly dismantles possession, drawing us from a vision of possession of toward a new vision of possession by. This would be a life all the way down to the bone and the dirt, a life that challenges border and boundary and creates and enacts life together in a way we build our environments in justice, care, and attention. The immediate objection to what I am saying here is that, Dr. Jennings, all of this comes way too late, after centuries of forced assimilation, after the transformation of land into private property and national territory and bodies into race and nationalist beings. Too late. What I am saying, it could be argued, comes long after creaturely perception has been so mangled by possessive naturalism that it is just wishful thinking to imagine other ways of seeing and relating to the world and to one another. The propertied order of things has hardened like concrete in the sun and is now a fixed pedagogical substance, a fixed way of teaching our bodies how to be in the world. These objections would be the final word, if not for the fact, a fact that we all know, that the propertied order of things has brought us to the brink of global disaster. It is not sustainable. It simply is not sustainable unless we decide that killing one another is the only way forward. It is not sustainable. And it has exhausted our geographic imaginations inside a dismal contemplation of our bodies and the land as property, as territory, and inside a contemplation of ownership. If our exhausted geographic imaginations are to be renewed, then why not turn to the place where such renewal might begin? By touching again a sheet that comes down from heaven and hear again a voice saying, "What I have made clean, you may not call unclean." Why not hear freshly an invitation to a shared contemplation, Jew and Gentile, of our creaturely connection, one that would first be formed inside a work of connecting multiple and diverse peoples in the actual living of creaturely life, and then secondly, one that creates a pedagogy of sensing and articulating the divine claim that links through multiple peoples to all living things. Shared contemplation woven into shared life, and shared life aimed always at justice. This, in effect, would be the beginnings, I want to suggest, of a doctrine of creation that would never leave the sense of second reading, never leave the fundamental reality that we are reading after biblical Israel, and therefore never leave a practice of second reading, of reading after another, and then another, and then another. It would also never leave the dreaming of a God who desires for us to share in the divine life as we share in the lives of one another, down to the bone and down to the dirt. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this. This was rich, worth a couple years' wait to get you to address us. The floor is open for questions. If we have anybody who wants to engage with what Dr. Jennings has offered to us tonight. There's a lot to unpack here. One of the things that I just want to get clarity on here then is you're making a connection with this vision of the sheet coming down, which is about clean and unclean food, which you only sort of speak to at the very end here. And it seems to be that you're saying that this notion that all things are clean now is a metaphor for untangling this possession of.
Yes, that's a beautiful way to put it, Dan. Yes.
And that implies a kind of change in practice.
Yes.
And so how would this new way of untangling get embodied
That's a
in
great
communities?
That's a great question. So let me repeat it so everybody can understand what Dane just asked me. How would the kind of untangling that I'm suggesting, moving away from an idea of possession of to one of possession by, how would it be embodied? Well, let me just start to outline it a little bit, but I do want to give you all a chance to ask me more questions. It would begin by thinking more carefully about the burden of possession itself, and thinking more carefully about our lives shaped inside the work of possession, and the impossibility of flourishing life without taking on really death-producing ways of being. And so what we would want to do is to start to catalog for ourselves all the ways in which we have to take on death-producing forms of life in order to enact possession of. Let's just talk about one little thing that is a big thing, but it's a little thing that will help us see the problem. Let's talk about, in theology, there's this idea called eschatology, that idea of last things, what's at the very end, what's at the end of all things. Well, what is at the end of all things inside of a world shaped by possession of? Trash. That's what's at the end. What's at the end is the trash that you consume will soon consume you. It is not sustainable to produce trash. So, whether you agree or disagree with what I'm saying, I will give you that one question. What will you do with your trash? What will you do with the fact that the way your body has been formed, the way your life has been formed, is for you each to produce trash? And if you cannot give an answer to yourself of how you will transform your body from a trash-producing machine, you are in serious trouble. So let's just start there, at the end.
Thank you. Yes, so Camille Markey will be with the mic getting us, so please hold your question until the mic has reached you so our online audience and the people in the room can hear.
Thanks so much for your narrative, your captivating narrative. I'm wondering if you could address a potential misinterpretation of what you're saying, namely that our broken relationship with creation begins with the history of capitalism, and that it doesn't predate it, and that there is a temptation to idealize the world before capitalism as if the project is to return us to that pre-capitalist order.
Great question.
And so if all of our metaphors about the fall are associated with private property and possession and conflict over modern notions of possession of land, how do we appreciate the fallenness of creation in a more abstract sense?
That's a great question. So we never want to think about going back. We want to think about going forward. And theologically, it's always best to think about the fall of creation not historically back there, but as that which we enact every day. So our fallenness probably is not best to think about as something that's happened way back there. Our fallenness is precisely in what we do every day. And so we're always working with the reality of our refusal to live into the life with God right now. But that means, though, we don't have to spend too much time thinking about kind of when did this start? We can. And by talking about capitalism and colonial modernity, we can see the latest modulation of it. And in that regard, I think we're on safe ground if we stay there. Now, what we don't want to do is to, as I said, we don't want to look back to a perfect time in the past, not only because it doesn't exist, but we can never go back. But the question is, can we go forward? That's what interests me more. Is it possible for me to rethink the way my body exists in the world? Is it possible in the midst of forces that tell me it's not possible, possessive naturalism, to actually say, no, it is possible. It is possible to connect in a new way. It is possible for the first time in my life to actually connect. It is possible to learn from those who, even at this moment across this planet, are struggling to sustain a connection to land of sensing, listening, learning, and in that way to begin anew right now. Now, if that does mean that we will have to have it with all narrative conversation, we will have to have a kind of reaching back for a moment, but very much like a rubber band, you pull it back in order to spring forward. And so we want some of that. But that's an excellent question.
Thank you for your luminous lecture. And I'm mindful of, and you've been mindful of them too, the students who are in the room. And I'm wondering if you could, if I could just ask you to maybe direct a comment to the students as they think about what they're studying.
Yes.
What it is that they might do in terms of discerning their own vocation. But
Great
if you
question.
could offer them a perspective specifically about how they think about their college education and beyond, near years after their college education, that connects with your lecture this evening.
Great, thank you. That was a wonderful question. And I'll try to be brief because I normally get lost in trying to when I answer this question. But for the students, the first thing I want you to do is to start to take place seriously. So let's think about that at 3-level students. First, you want to ask, what does it mean for Boston College to be in this place here, in this city? What's the history of my school here? What's the connection of my school? What is the moral imprint of my school in this place? That's the first question I want you to ask. What is the what is the moral character of my existence in a school, in this city, in this place right now? That's the first question I want you to ask of yourself, your teachers, and all those administrators here. I want you to ask that crucial question. Then the next question I want you to ask yourselves is, how is my education tied to how I will live in place? How am I learning how to hear place and be taught by those people who hear place? So no matter what field of endeavor I'm going into, how will I be geographically aware? Not just a place on a map, but how will I have a moral footprint, a moral imprint in the place I live? How will I live in a place where I'm not simply living on the surface, and so that my very existence is inconsequential to that place? That is to say, how will I learn here how to be in a place that simply is not a site of extraction by me? I would write that down. That's a great thing. How will I live in a place that I am not an agent of extraction? That's the second thing. The third thing you would want to think about is whatever field of endeavor I am considering, how will I learn to give voice to the place where I live through me? That is to say, how will that place speak through me in such a way that I give witness to my belief that I am a creature created by God? Those of you who believe that you're a creature created by God. So let's just start there. I have much more to say that I will a little later on.
I think we have time for one last question. It'll be Charlotte over here.
So I love what you said about this self-identifying as readers and using that, the example from Acts as the way in which Jews are readers and Gentiles are readers is different.
Yes.
And I would love for you to speak more about this identification, self-identifying as second readers.
Yes.
What is your vision for how that should shape Christian life and worship?
That's a great question. So it should, at the first level, help us do something that we have not yet done. Where 90% of most Christians don't have the memo that we're reading after a people. We are reading inside their reading. And it's not simply a historical point, it is a point of formation that redounds to the way we approach the world. That is, we approach the world as learners who want to read after. And we have learned that first deeply inside of our faith. We read after. And so that means with every people we encounter, because we have been shaped inside this reading after, we come to listen and learn how they read, how they understand the creation, how they listen so that we might learn to listen with them, not instead of them, with them, of the world in which they live, so that we slowly take on the full reality of witness. You see, a witness is one who, when others look at them, they see more than can be captured in a single glance. There's so much that they give witness to. And that's crucial for us. Now, of course, all of us here, those of us who have been raised within the Christian traditions, we've been denied this fundamental task, and thus pedagogically, we've been denied this fundamental skill of knowing how to read after. And so that means the very way in which our lives with the people of Israel should have been shaped inside a shared reading and listening, it is not there. It is the thing absent that should be present. So what this means for us as we move forward is a crucial question we want to ask ourselves. What does it mean to listen? And how is listening fundamental to the witness of my faith? Not speaking, but listening. In theology, we know that in Christian thought, there is at the heart of it the doctrine of the incarnation. And of course, what we understand by that is God is witnessed in Jesus, not when he starts talking, but when he is. So as a little baby, when he's not talking, he's listening. He's witnessing God, which means that there is a reality of Christianity, of following him, that is missing, that so many people think that they are only giving witness when they talk, rather than when they listen. And so listening becomes crucial, especially now for understanding the nature of creation. We are inside of a beautiful invitation to follow Israel in its reading of the creation. Let me stop there, because I can go on for days.
Yes. 30 seconds in a minute, and we could, on one foot.
Sure, I
Yeah.
can actually just
Yeah.
ask the question, what is, with the listening and the talking, what is the role of actual living Jewish people in dialogue, the dialogue that you'd like to have? Here in Newton, there are 30,000 living Jewish people. And I would also like to just footnote the word assimilation in your discourse is deeply, deeply threatening.
Exactly. That's why I spend so much time trying to think it in a different way. And as I said, why assimilation? Because I'm trying to rethink what life together in the land means. So if if we are talking about a life in which we are engaged in shared living in the land, that's shared life. And so what word means actual shared life and not separate but equal life? That's why I'm using the word. But I'm deeply aware that assimilation is not only offensive for most people, it's repulsive, the very idea of it. And so to use it, I'm trying to, in a sense, put it on its head to do a different kind of work. And so, in point of fact, I mean, this gets back to this wonderful question I was asked a moment ago. It's not simply, I mean, and this should be fairly obvious, it's not simply biblical Israel I'm talking about. I'm talking about an ongoing reality of listening and life together. But now, when I say life together, I want a thickness that it tends not to have for people. Life together for so many of us means, you know, we live in the same neighborhood, same city. That's not life together. I'm thinking about life together that issues in fundamental shared story and injustice. That's not separate but equal existence. So I have to come after the way in which we tend to think together as not really together. Thank you for that great question.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think we're at time. There is a dessert reception in the back and a book table. And perhaps if you didn't get a chance to ask your question of Dr. Jennings, you still might have a chance. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.